How do these external actors influence water governance?
We see a lot of Chinese investments in hydropower, for instance, irrigation, especially in areas where the national governments or the supranational government are not very present.
How does corporate influence shape decision-making?
Regarding the infrastructure of water distribution. So it's a part of the lobby of the big construction companies.
Are the current frameworks sufficient?
Bolivia and Brazil border and transboundary forest fires coming from one side to the other, and how the countries are managing this. There are no tools. It's an ongoing problem.
Let's explore the opposite hypothesis that's often referred to as water wars.
Many of the conflicts in the territory, how people are struggling over water, these conflicts happen within the national state.
How can sustainability concerns be balanced with economic priorities?
The mining happening in Bolivia, how they affect the countries, the rivers alongside the Brazilian border. It's interesting to see how water it's part of the state formation and how it's appropriated by the policymakers.
Welcome to New Regional Orders, a podcast by the Center for Regional Integration. I'm your host and the Center's founding director, Ivo Ganchev. This episode is a continuation of the previous episode, and it presents the second part of my conversation with Dr. Luis Paulo Batista da Silva, a geographer from
Fluminense Federal University,
who was previously at the University of Sao Paulo and at the Federal University of Bahia. On the previous episode, in the first part of our discussion, we explored the role of geography in shaping regional integration in Latin America, with a particular focus on transboundary water governance. In the second part of our conversation, on this episode, Luis and I turned to some of the broader dynamics of hydropolitics and water governance in the region. We discussed the growing tension between regional integration and fragmentation, the influence of external actors such as China, the United States, NGOs, and multilateral banks, and the role of multinational corporations in shaping infrastructure and privatization policies. We also examine how climate change, agriculture, and mining are reshaping the governance of rivers and aquifers, and why incorporating local and indigenous knowledge is essential for sustainable cooperation. The conversation also touches on lessons that Latin America can both offer and learn from other regions, the risks of conflict and opportunities for cooperation, and ongoing research into borderlands, dams, and environmental governance. This is a wide-ranging discussion that shows why water is not only a shared resource, but also a central axis of politics, conflict, and cooperation in South America. I hope you enjoy listening, and don't forget to like and subscribe on YouTube or on your favorite podcasting platform. Now let's roll the intro and get started. Welcome to the show.
Ivo Ganchev, Beijing-based academic, executive, and consultant.
I wanted to try a theory on you.
Mira, esa es una pregunta para un examen de grado.
Go to the communities and listen to people,
Exploring change across the borders. Welcome to New Regional Orders.
For sure, yeah. You mentioned that there is a sort of a division, I guess, between countries, especially the ones with right-wing governments and left-wing governments. So when you think about this division and the way it affects regional integration and water governance, do you think that if we are not seeing more regional integration, we're then more likely to see more regional fragmentation of sorts, or perhaps more conflicts and tensions as well?
In terms of water, I was telling you, for instance, we are seeing this is the opposite side of the trend of effectiveness of the river-based organizations. I was telling in the beginning that the water governance might be cross-sectoral, but the more effective institutions are very sectoral. So, yeah, this is a difficulty of the water governance. And if you're seeing the projects are gaining more, talking about hydropower and navigation, and yeah, it's not so integrated as it should be.
Yeah, that's I guess an interesting insight, because normally we always speak about regional integration, but as you mentioned, we might be seeing some more regional fragmentation, which I guess does not receive as much attention in the literature necessarily. Now, let's also talk about external actors when it comes to Latin American water governance. A lot of the infrastructure projects, such as dams and irrigation systems, often involve external actors. We've seen USAID, we've seen NGOs funding certain programs on water management. We know that there are countries such as China, which has a huge capacity to build dams or other relevant infrastructure. We have multilateral institutions such as the World Bank, the Inter-American Development Bank that have funded and certain initiatives as well. How do these external actors influence water governance, and what role do they play in facilitating cooperation, if any?
Cooperation, as I was telling you about SIC Plata, the organization of the La Plata River Basin, so you had a lot of, the organization had a lot of funds from the Jeff for making projects happen in different parts of the La Plata River Basin. The Amazon River Basin organization has as well many funds from different UN agencies, but we see a lot of Chinese investments in hydropower, for instance, irrigation. Brazil was for some years this external part in countries like Peru and Bolivia, investing in dams. It was some big corruptions as well, scandals the last 10 years about the Brazilian actions especially in Peru. But now you're seeing China taking this role now very, very importantly. So yeah, and I'm conducting research right now, especially in the Brazil-Bolivia border, and we're seeing how these global NGOs like Nature Conservancy, the WWF, are participating in the territory, the environmental management, especially in areas where the national governments or the supranational government are not very present, like in the Bolivian Amazon, and how they have a transboundary agenda. They have a transboundary strategy, how to manage nature and how to conserve and how to be part of the process of management of protected areas and river basins. Brazil, comparing with our neighbors, especially the Amazon neighbors, Brazil has just small presence in the territory, but it has more presence in the territory than other countries. So that's where external partners such as China and NGOs are participating in the management of the natural resources. Yeah.
Now, beyond these external actors, which may be NGOs or other states, we also have private companies which also play a role in transboundary water governance. How does corporate influence from multinational companies, from South American or Latin American companies, or even from local companies shape decision-making in the area of water management? And are there examples of perhaps private sector collaboration of sorts improving water governance, or perhaps of economic interests and lobbying that tends to complicate cooperation?
Yeah, for instance, it was 2019 in Brazil. It passed a new law on water governance. It's most focused, now I won't remember the name of the law, but it's more regarding the infrastructure of water distribution. So it's a part of the lobby of the big construction companies and then building companies. In 2019 as well, we had this new law as well for privatization of the water supply. International companies are starting to come to Brazil for starting to implement the water supply in the big cities. Here in Rio, for instance, now we have like 5 to 6. I can check this amount of different companies that split the cities in areas of water supply. So this is a ongoing process here, how this distribution is happening here in Rio.
Of course, this is, I guess, one other aspect of one type of actors that we have to think about when we are discussing water management. Now, let's also talk about climate change. Climate change is happening. It's increasing the frequency of extreme weather events, from droughts to flooding. How are these environmental changes affecting water governance in Latin America? And how is, I guess, the conversation on climate change here shaped? And what are the current frameworks sufficient to address the changes that are going on in terms of climate change?
Not at all, not at all. As I told you, many of these tools for cooperation were built for economic development, especially focusing economic development. So they were not created for this. They were talking about a new world. As I told you, the last 2 years we had a huge droughts in the Amazon River Basin, with in sequence a lot of floods. It's a completely new perspective of how the nature is working. And we had this last year some of the huge forest fires in the area I was talking to you about the Bolivia and Brazil border, and transboundary forest fires coming from one side to the other, and how the countries are managing this. There are no tools for still to work on this. It's difficult, for instance, one example is it's difficult to share some the firefighters for coming to one side to the other, because they are national bases and if a fire cross some fires cross huge rivers, like rivers in the Amazon, from one side to the other. And how if one city has the firefighters for start to combat these fires, but they cannot go to the other side. This is one very specific and very important aspect of this transboundary cooperation. And so we have more monitoring, we have more data being shared between the countries, but how to deal with this actually, and how to mitigate and adapt to these problems, it's an ongoing problem. We started to talk. I was talking about this process of coordination and diplomatic tools for surface water in the 60s, 90s. We have the first agreements on groundwater, such as Guarani in the 2000s. Now we are seeing the other changes in the area rivers. So this process, it's a matter of the day. And how we are going to manage this, it's still a topic for research and policy making.
So I guess based on what you're saying, there is really some space for creating new mechanisms or extending certain mechanisms to ensure there's more transboundary cooperation when it comes to governing water, other events related to natural disasters like fires and so on. Now, when we think about lessons that perhaps Latin America can learn from other regions or other regions can learn from Latin America, we know that Europe has a developed governance framework in general in terms of the European Union. We know that some other regions, such as Africa, are facing a lot of natural disasters and also a lot of questions in terms of water governance and so on. Are there any lessons that we can apply from these regions to Latin America or vice versa from Latin America to these regions?
The lesson, I think, it's important learning from Latin America to other parts. It's how to, but it's still the national government still to have to learn this lesson as well. It's to bring more seriously the local based organizations, tacit organizations, and how people organize themselves for managing water. The border actually they don't divide very strictly the population. Yeah, people are engaging now day to day in there for using water, to sharing, for doing agriculture, for how the uses of water we might think. So it's important to learn the lessons from those local-based organizations and the institutional tacit institutions that are being built in the territory. I believe this is a lesson from Latin America, and wherever this is happening, it should be well studied and well understood.
What about the other way around? Do you think that Latin America should learn certain things from other regions?
I guess, for instance, Southeast Asia, in terms of national agreements and engagement, national, not local, but national organizations. I think Southeast Asia has some interesting organizations for managing water, talking about the Mekong River Basin. It's a very different pathway from, you're talking about all the effects of US, effects on the Southeast Asia, and how China, it's a big figure in the higher spout part of the Mekong River Basin, but the other countries, they are trying to engage in conversation about how to use the water and how to cope with this development project. I don't know. I believe it's an interesting case for worldwide, but I believe this is a more case of how nations and the state might think about water governance.
Yeah, for sure, that's an interesting case. In fact, some of my graduate students, when I was working at Queen Mary, were quite interested in the Mekong Delta cooperation agreements. So I guess you're not the only person who has noticed that it might be a case that you can learn you can learn some lessons from. Now, we've talked about water cooperation. Let's explore the opposite hypothesis that's often referred to as water wars. Some scholars warn that this can potentially happen in the future as climate change makes resources more scarce, and others argue that water cooperation is far more common and water wars are unlikely, or they're basically an outlier. Based on your research, do you see water as more of a driver of conflict or cooperation both in Latin America and other regions, and I guess historically as well?
Mm-hmm. It's interesting because taking the literature, also talk about the critical hydropolitics, we can say that both happens at the same time, the conflict and the cooperation. If you can think about an agreement or a treaty that it's unfair, that it doesn't take seriously the interest, it's based on coercion or just unfair, and how the different countries might use their water, it might start some conflict as well. As I told you, some of the treaties here in South America were thinking about the interests of Brazil and Argentina. So the Itaipu then agreement, it's more focused on the the harsh power of Brazil affecting Paraguay. So it's part of the conflict. This cooperation too, it's part of the conflict. There is a huge in between the two. So talking about water wars, as I was telling you as well, that many of the conflicts in the territory, how people are struggling over water, these conflicts happen within the national state. Fighting sometimes with violence happening. You know, we can think in Latin America. We can think about the Bolivian water wars, and many struggles. Talking about the privatization of water supply here in Brazil the last few years. If you're talking about fight, this kind of conflicts, most of them happen within the national state.
Yeah, as you mentioned, there is a lot of in between. I guess that it's more difficult to discuss because it's not as easy to conceptualize, right? It's easier to conceptualize sort of black and white and opposite sides of the debate. Now, you mentioned earlier in the conversation local communities, and I guess in some ways there's other aspects of this, like indigenous knowledge of water resources in the area, and a sense of water justice in general. Local communities are also the first to be affected when it comes to water shortages or contamination. What are some ways that governance structures can better integrate the local populations and the indigenous knowledge that these people have of the ecosystem in the area when it comes to the decision-making processes?
Yeah, I believe it's important to think the structure of decision-making not be centralized in just one agency, one organization. The devolved kind of governance, it's important to have this, how to bring the participation of this people in the conversation. No, so it's not just in Brasilia, Buenos Aires that decision might happen, but in the local. So, for instance, I was telling you about this project of the dams binational dams in Bolivia and Brazil, in the Guaporé River. So there are a lot of people already talking about the effects of these dams and how they see other dams in other parts of the Amazon, the effects they make, and they are telling very loudly, we don't want this in our place, in our territory, and this might be heard. And so thinking about this, the whole river basins, for instance, the Amazon River Basin, this kind of voice and complaint, and it's getting more loud in many parts. So the structure of the governance, I believe it's how to make this converge to one agency, organization, whatever, to these ideas of how water might be managed, it's be heard, to be part of the decision making. So that's, I believe, is the challenge for making this more presence of the indigenous and local level inhabitants.
That's, I guess, a really important point, the idea of decentralizing in some ways decision-making to involve local communities. Now, there are also industries that depend heavily on water resources, and most importantly, I guess, that would be agriculture and mining. In many regions like the Amazon, water use for irrigation or for extraction has led to various conflicts between different stakeholders. When you think about these industries in particular, how do they shape water governance, and how can sustainability concerns be balanced with economic priorities?
They have a very important role in shaping the water governance as huge users of water as they are. If you're thinking about some of the biggest river basins in South America, they're very affected by not just the level of water, the amount of water they took, but how they damage the water with the pollution as well. As we're talking about some mining accidents or mining disasters, and how they affect the whole river basins. And it's shared as well between countries. We are talking about this illegal mining, coal mining in the Amazon river basins with a lot of mercury, the contamination affecting crossing borders between along transboundary rivers such as Guaporé, Mamoré rivers, and affecting a lot of Indigenous and Ribeirinho community, the community living nearby the rivers. So, yeah, we're talking for the legal mining agriculture that had a lot of power to implement their ideas in water governance, but as well in illegal activities such as illegal mining or illegal deforestation as well. There is an interesting study from some peers from São Paulo, seeing how in some of the biggest frontiers in Brazil, in the northeast, between Bahia, Tocantins, Maranhão, and Piauí, how the huge extraction of water from the aquifers, they are decreasing the level of the rivers as well. They are affecting the level of the rivers, and this affects many communities along the stream. As well as telling you thinking about transboundary, you can see the mining happening in Bolivia, how they affect the countries, the rivers alongside the Brazilian border. So yes, they might be take responsibilities of their action as well, and we're talking about many accidents, many effects. They're not being not having many. Let's say take the responsibility of some actions. Yes, so still a lot of be done as well for this industry, and it's not very optimistic, because we are in a region with this some say like the commodity consensus or the neo-extractivism, this kind of concept that tries to understand how's the whole economically, politically of these sectors. Yes, indeed, Brazil, Bolivia, many of the South American countries depend a lot on this kind of industry for their development. So I don't see this happening quite soon, the responsibility of these industries.
Yeah, that's, I guess, from an environmental perspective, one of the issues that we should be looking at and thinking about addressing somehow. But when you look into the future, into the next decade or so, are there any other emerging challenges apart from what you just spoke about, and I guess potential solutions when it comes to hydropolitics? And what do you think the role of Brazil is going to be in addressing these challenges in the future?
Well, what is happening, I guess, I believe. It's more like we're talking about the fragmentation of the process. How these sectors are not very well connected in the water governance. So a lot of hydropower projects, development projects using water for irrigations happening, and navigation, and so on and so forth. But what other kind of more optimistic of the problem, I believe it's we see some interesting perspective from Colombia as well, trying to decarbonize its economy and trying to bring some environmental perspective, hopefully from crossing its borders as well. Lots of struggles and fights from the local fight for the territory alongside the Amazon River Basin, alongside the La Plata River Basin, and how they are gaining voice and gaining more presence in the national government. So this can bring more water justice and environmental justice to the national agendas. So hopefully this process can be managed altogether. This struggle can be managed.
Now, speaking about struggles, hopefully there are some solutions to them. If you could speak to policymakers today, and you can choose any group of policymakers, I guess, that you want. If you could propose one reform to them or make one suggestion to them to improve transboundary water governance in South America, what would it be?
I might say that we must look to the territory. As a geographer, since the beginning, I'm very interested and very passionate for looking what happens to the territory, how these big ideas of regionalism and regional integration happen in the territory, how we might listen what people, how they are affected and how they might understand their lives. And look to the territory as well brings the idea to make things that happens by these communities divided by a political boundary, look for what they have in common.
Well, I hope that the policymakers indeed take your recommendations into account and also ask more of the researchers that actually spend a long time on this field to give some input into designing new policies. Now, as we move towards the end of our conversation, I ask all of our guests to make some recommendations in terms of books, audiovisual, or other resources that might be of interest to our audience. And these could be about hydropolitics or about Latin American politics and regionalism more broadly. And they could be books, academic papers, they could be documentaries, series, or even experts or media channels that you think are potentially interesting and important to follow. So if a graduate student or a colleague asked you, what are the essential resources that you would recommend to them?
Well, firstly, I would recommend the book I organized recently. Last year was published with Isabella Espíndola, a colleague from International Water Association in London, and Wagner Costa Ribeiro from University of São Paulo. We organized this book after a series of interviews, talks with some academics and from all around the world, talking about the different examples and approaches in understanding transboundary water governance. The book's called New Perspectives on Transboundary Water Governance, Disciplinary Approach and Global Case Studies. It's interesting to see how worldwide how water governance has been studied. We have cases from Latin America, obviously, but Central America, Middle East, North Africa, and South Africa as well. So it's a very interesting book. Second recommendation, I might say it's a documentary series about the Amazon and the livelihoods of Amazonian people. It's called Amazonian History, in Portuguese, Amazônia, uma nova história. I guess it's in YouTube. And it has a specific chapter about water, and it's odd but interesting to see how in many communities all over Amazon River basins, even though it's plenty of water, there are a lack of potable water. The river just crosses in front of your house, but it's not usable because it's contaminated and it's contaminated the fisheries, or so your livelihood it's jeopardized. So yeah, but it as well shows some interesting projects that tries to cope with this and makes it better for the livelihoods. As a third recommendation, I believe it's an interesting book. It's about hydropolitics, but shows as well many of the negotiations about the Itaipu Dam. As it's a topic of our conversation, so I believe it's interesting for our listeners that it's a book called Hydropolitics, the Itaipu Dam, Sovereignty and Engineering of a Modern South America, from anthropologists from the United States called Christine Walsh. It's interesting to see how water it's part of the state formation and how it's appropriated by the policymakers in both countries, and it demonstrates a part of the history of South America, regional integration as well. So I believe it's interesting for the audience of the podcast. Alas, that's a recommendation for a lifetime is come for the carnival once a lifetime. I believe it's worth it. So everybody might come one day.
Well, of course, I hope that everybody gets a chance to experience it, right?
Yeah.
And these are indeed great recommendations that I'm sure will be of interest to some of our audience. Now, let's also talk about your research a little bit more. What are the current research projects that you're working on, and what should we expect to see from you in the future for those of our listeners and viewers that are really interested in the types of topics that you're working on? What should they expect to see from you in the coming, I guess, months or years?
Well, I'm just finishing our research with some students about we were researching the preparation and the negotiations about the Itaipu Dam between Brazil and Paraguay. And as I told you before, for Paraguay, it's a huge, it's very important, the Itaipu Dam, in the national budget and the revenue. So it's in the news daily basis, the Itaipu. So we were following a bit of the discussions, how the different political groups were preparing themselves and putting their perspective on the agenda. So we are finishing this and publishing a little bit in the next months. Now, currently, we're doing a research with some colleagues here from Brazil and Bolivia and Chile as well. I have a background on geography, but political geography and border studies. And since we see here in South America, the border studies, it's very interested in cultural geography, economic geography, and these topics of regional integration. We see a gap in the environmental discussion. So we want to bring the environmental agenda for the border studies, trying to see how the countries in South America cooperate or conflict in different perspectives in environmental agenda. We were spoken a lot of water, but we can talk about biodiversity, the management of protected areas. So yeah, we are working this project with these colleagues and our case studies in the border between Brazil and Bolivia. It's a very interesting region because it's the biggest boundary between Brazil and one of its neighbors, such as Bolivia. Its biggest boundary is with Brazil, and it's a very diverse region that comes from the lowlands of the Amazon River Basin to the Cerrado, the lowlands of Pantanal. So it's a very diverse. There is a lot of diversity in ecosystems and livelihood in this border region. So I believe soon we are going to see more interesting information and data about this project.
Well, I'm sure that our listeners and viewers are looking forward to the outcome of your research. I'll be following these research projects as well with great interest. And Luis, this has been a fascinating conversation. You've shed light on a topic that's rarely discussed but essential in terms of hydropolitics, sustainability, and environmental governance as well. So thanks very much for joining the podcast, and I hope to speak to you soon again.
Thank you, Ivo. I hope it's useful and understandable for everyone.
I'm sure it will be.